As Gaza still counts its dead, Israel stands accused of committing war crimes during its 22-day war on the Strip. Can Israel be held accountable, and who'd be able to do it? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Imran Garda. Israel has begun forming a defense team in case war crimes charges are brought against its military. Human rights groups are claiming that Israel acted illegally during its 22-day campaign in the Gaza Strip. The International Criminal Court has been discussing the possibility of war crimes tribunals, and the UN are calling for a full investigation into Israel's treatment of civilians, as Bethan Howe reports.
Burns victims at the main hospital in Khan Yunis in Gaza. Doctors here say these war-related injuries have them questioning what weapons were used during Israel's 3-week offensive.
I'm sure it is a chemical weapons, and the problem is that, okay, this is the transient effect, the temporary effect is end out. But what about the long-term effect?
Israel has been accused of using illegal weapons, including white phosphorus. It's legal under international law to release the substance into the air to cover troop movements. But the allegation is that Israel used it as a weapon, indiscriminately targeting civilians.
My impression is that no one's denying that white phosphorus was used. The question is, how was it used, what kind of shells were they, and was it used in appropriate ways?
Israel has also been criticised by human rights organisations for using excessive force in densely populated areas. In one incident, it's alleged Israeli troops herded the members of an extended family into a building. They then repeatedly shelled it. The Red Cross had said that it was then 4 days before the emergency services were allowed to access the survivors, many of them children, who were found sat next to the bodies of their dead relatives. The Fourth Geneva Convention that Israel is signed up to stipulates that a war crime is murder or ill treatment of civilians, and destruction and devastation not justified by military necessity. The UN Council on Human Rights has voted for a resolution condemning Israel's offensive.
We are deeply concerned about attacks that may have caused indiscriminate or disproportionate loss of civilian life in violations of the rules of war. Most notably, the January 6 attack near a UN school housing displaced persons, which killed a reported 40 civilians.
Israel has suggested that Hamas was using civilians as human shields, which is why the number killed was so high. Israel denies any wrongdoing and has already begun forming a defence team in the event of war crimes charges being brought. A Palestinian minister has met with the International Criminal Court's prosecutor to discuss the allegations. In the hospitals of Gaza, doctors continue to deal with wounds they've never seen before. Whether their patients are war crimes victims or unfortunate casualties, to them is just academic. Bethan Howe for Inside Story.
Well, joining us now are our guest in Jerusalem, Robbie Sabel. He's a former legal advisor to the Israeli Foreign Ministry and a lecturer of international law at the Hebrew University. And in Nablus, Abdul-Sattar Kassem. He's a professor of political science at Nablus Najah University. Thank you very much for joining us, gentlemen. Robbie Sabel, let's start off talking about white phosphorus. We know it was used. There's a chorus of voices saying it was used over civilian areas. It's a bit indefensible from your part, isn't it?
White phosphorus is a legal weapon when it's used for marking and for smokescreen. This is what the Israeli army used it for. And, by the way, I would like to quote here Mr. Peter Herby, who is in charge of arms and mines for the International Committee of the Red Cross. In an interview with the AP News Service, he said, and I'm reading, that it was in fact used to create smoke or illuminate a target, and we have no evidence to suggest it being used in any other way. That is from the official representative of the International Committee of the Red Cross.
All right, let me throw a quote back at you then. British weapons expert Chris Cobb-Smith, sent to Gaza by Amnesty International, said, I quote, "We saw streets and alleyways littered with evidence of the use of white phosphorus, including still burning wedges and the remnants of the shells and canisters fired by the Israeli army. I repeat, streets and alleyways littered with evidence of the use of white phosphorus. We've also got our own pics. we've got Human Rights Watch, United Nations Relief and Works Agency as well, saying it was fired over a civilian area. That seems to be pretty strong evidence.
It's strong evidence that white phosphorus was used. Israel has not denied it. The fighting was over populated areas simply for the reason that Hamas put their rockets in populated areas. However, it was not directed at civilians. Now, of course, if you're firing smoke shells, they're going to land on the ground, and by the way, they're dangerous to handle, as by the way is any flare that is still burning, but they were not aimed at civilian casualties, at civilian personnel.
How can you guarantee that nothing you fire will hit a civilian, given that this was the most and is the most densely populated area in the world? Israel knew that civilians would be in the areas it targeted. And doesn't a war crime also include the fact that you know civilians will die no matter who you're targeting?
This raises a very fundamental question. How do you fight an enemy that places its rockets in a civilian population? You have two choices. One of them is not to return fire. But bear in mind, we had literally thousands of rockets aimed at our civilian towns and villages. Rockets, by the way, which included shrapnel. So the possibility of not returning fire did not exist. The other is to try and minimize civilian casualties. This is what we did. We did it by a number of methods. One of them is dropping leaflets, hundreds of thousands of leaflets over the area saying you're about to be bombed. We did this in order to let the civilian population free, knowing, by the way, that it gave them a military advantage. There was no surprise. The other we did, I think, is an innovation of connecting computers to their phones. So the population of an area all got simultaneous phone warnings, we are about to reply to fire. The other possibility of simply not returning fire is not something that a country can stand by. By the way, we have to protect Palestinian civilians. We also have to protect our own civilians.